Hey, gang, welcome back. It is I, Dr. Bosky, and I thought I would share a little something with you. So, a while back, it feels like a long time ago at this point, and this is primarily about how I go about just doing creative things, right? Like, and there's a lot of things like I think very Bob Ross like, where as you're just creating, you let accidents happen, you respond to those, and you just trial and error experiment, and this is you just refining and finding those things that really delight you. And in this particular case, we're talking about bullets, right? So, and today we got a comment from MK Studio OP. Thank you very much. And MK said, "This game is very top. You are the man. Congratulations on your game. Could you teach us how to make these bombs?" So I was like, all right, cool. And we use a tool called Shmup Creator here. I do tips and trips series on that. And it's been a lot of fun because it helps me focus primarily on the creative aspect, the design aspect, and less on the coding side. So there are limitations, but there are things you can do when you have limitations. So MK, thank you very much for the shout out here. Look at my little happy face, right? Like that, so I thought I would give you guys kind of a little sneak peek as to what this looks like and ultimately answer the question on how we created this. So first of all, I had to dig out where I put my experiment for this because we just finished, this is one of our final ones, but we just finished, and it was about 2 months. We did basically a bullet exercise where I went through, I commissioned Cartoon Coffee. This is the Cartoon Coffee mascot. And I really had a lot of ideas for the types of projectiles I wanted to see. And this time around, instead of using the particle system to get a lot of glows and things built into the projectiles, like for instance, like we could have the Missile here and we could do the trail in the particle system in the engine, but you have a cap on how many particles can render in any particular queue. And once you hit that cap, particles stop rendering. So and it's kind of fun to tax the engine and see how much you can get out of it. But basically game development or game design comes down to a lot of, what do you want to create? And you only have so many resources. And it's variable, but trying to discover how you can min-max or maximize your resources to create that type of experience. A good example is like, if you want your game engine to run at 60 frames a second, which is really good for input, it feels really smooth, it's great. And say you want to do a really over-the-top cutscene that has lots of awesome like ray tracing and particle effects and high geometry and textures. Well, it's not a bad thing to change the frame rate of your game engine for that cutscene to be like 24 frames a second. It's a very common thing. You could make that a stylistic choice. That also means then you have more CPU and GPU time to achieve a higher fidelity, but you wouldn't want to run your whole game at 24 frames a second, depending on the game. But for an action game or a shmup, you definitely want to maintain 60 frames a second as much as possible. There are exceptions. One of the things that is beautiful about shmup games and also fighting games from back in the day, Street Fighter, 2 and things like that, is when you manage to get a number or enough projectiles or enemies on screen or big things, then your game will slow down. You don't want to hitch, but it'll slow down, become slower and slower. And that slowdown, because you're really pushing the hardware and you can do some emulation too these days, but since you're pushing the hardware capabilities back then, and all designers kind of do that, it's a rite of passage. You then have a scenario where then slowdown actually kind of becomes part of the gameplay. It makes it easier to navigate giant bullet streams and things like that. Okay, so a couple things here. Maybe I'll just show you my setup here. So I have basically what I call the enemy room. Sometimes it's my sandbox, and this is where I just prototype stuff. This gives me the ability to not have to worry about how all these things will fit into the level or the boss or things like that. There's something to be said for doing that kind of very specific design. But when you're playing around and just noodling and you're like prototyping or tech arting, your whatever concept you're doing, you kind of need to start to think about how you want to go about that. And so one of the ways that I wanted to be doing it here is, for me, I wanted to have like a checkerboard enemy because I want to be able to see projectiles on lights and darks, right? And you can see that here. Like that helps me understand visibility between dark and light, because I can't guarantee necessarily, and we're going to do probably 5 or 6 levels for Interstellar 2, but I can't guarantee that every environment is going to be light or dark. It's probably a mix. So it's nice to be able to see that as well. Oh, and by the way, coming back to the with the projectiles, right? So instead of doing the flames and particles, we basically did those in the sprite sheet itself, right? So, and I can give you an example of that. Let's see. This is just kind of, we're having conversation. So interstellar to assets down to particles. All right. And let's see here. I don't know, Missile. I got to look and see. Let me take a look here. I got my setup here. So we're automatically going to set 5 on camera view. Let me go in and take a look at weapons. And set 5 here is the enemy. So another little trick that I use, because at some point you want to be able to find this stuff. So anytime I'm creating enemy attacks, if I'm creating player weapons, right, I usually use like a tag E or P for player _ and then what the thing is. And I've gotten into the habit now of enumerating things because I may want to do variations. So it's a little thing that I've come to. So all right, so we're looking at the skin is what it's called here, which is just the sprite sheet or the bullet texture. So Missile 01P. All right, Missile. I know it started with an E, right? Enemy. Oh, it's not a particle. It is an asset. It's a model. It's under bullets. There we go. E. There's my P's. Where are my E's? Especially my E underscores. And you try to do these things. Did I not read that correctly? Oh, no. So it's just skin Missile. So, yeah, okay. So the in-game asset name is this. This is the texture. So it's Missile. Missile. There we go. So I have in this case, Missile 01, and I have a Y for yellow and a P for pink because I wanted to have a differentiation there. Let's open up Photoshop. All right, cool. So you can see here, this is the sprite sheet. So in this case, this might be a little bit of overkill because we're basically in a 4x4. There's a lot of extra. There's a lot of alpha here. This is not great. So I need to optimize this at some point, which basically just means I need to pack each one of these images into a much smaller format. So, but that's not what we're here to look at, but it's good to know. You should always be aware of this, right? So it's a 512 by 512, which means that each one of these is 128, 256, so it's 512. So, and so here, the key though is instead of using the particle engine, because I want to use that for other things, and so we basically started baking into the sprite sheet these frames of animation. So, and there's a lot of really great, asset creation bits here. So one of those is SpriteMancer. Yeah, it's SpriteMancer. Cool. Yeah. So like, for instance, if you haven't, pick up SpriteMancer because SpriteMancer basically gives you the ability to create all kinds of cool, they're doing things with geometry, but cool like particles. So you then can use SpriteMancer to create the look that you're looking for and then chop it up into frames by exporting it. And then you reconstruct those frames for the Shmup Creator engine, then to be animated sprite sheets for Shmup Creator. So just a little bit there. So that's one of the real tricks there. And then the other thing, just to take a quick look so you guys have a sense, maybe a little peek behind the curtain. And it's hard when you're doing it all. There's a tendency to get kind of up to a point where you're like, I think this is good enough, and then you move on to the next thing. And as a solo indie developer, you're always juggling a bunch of different plates. I highly recommend you take your time, develop your processes, and then when you come back to your process, it will help you maintain that level of consistency or quality. So like, let me give you an example of here. I'll do this here. Let's see. So I set up a board for when we did essentially use all these different boards. So when we did the bullets, Interstellar Bullet VFX project. And so in this, I basically, Trello's free, which is great. You can collaborate with folks. And whenever I deal with contractors or deal with other folks, I always bring them into a process. This is my production hat, my production manager hat, right? I bring them into a process that that is comfortable for me, because at the end of the day, you know, I'm managing more than one project. You know, like I've got a lot of projects and I need to be able to sit down. I open the Trello board and it's like, okay, cool. Where am I at with these projects? And then it helps me just stay focused, right? So, and that's a whole other thing. If anyone has interest, I can definitely talk about that more. But here's a good example, right? Here's like, you know, here's some of the inspiration. I was like, oh, I want to do kind of like a Missle thing in our own kind of tune style. And so I set up basically at the end of the day, I set up you know, in this case, I was looking very heavily at Gunvein. I was very happy about Gunvein. So I went through, and recorded a bunch of video for my copy of Gunvein. And then I just made time code videos. So then the artists I was working with, they could see, I don't want to copy it exactly, but I wanted to kind of convey this basically this this look, right? One of the things that Boghog and the NG Dev guys do really well is they do a great job playing with saturation and color. And frankly, Gunvein is such a silky smooth game. I really enjoyed it. So, and so I basically set up each of my projects in preparation. I had my cartoon coffee person take a look at each of the projects as a basis. I pointed out what I liked and didn't like. And then, you know, like as a starting point, depending on what it was, I had a delivery checklist for like, hey, let's make sure we get the individual frames, and make sure I get the PSD file in the different layers, make sure I have the sprite sheets with alpha channels set up and things like that, right? And so I basically have a reference, stuff I want to keep an eye on, right? I have the to-do. There's nothing in here because we finished our bullet exploration for this case, right? We have doing, which is self-explanatory. So this is when he pulls a project into the doing category, and depending on where he has a version, he'll put it in follow-up, tag it for me. I'll take a look at it, and then I come back into the project card, and you can see kind of over time, basically, in this case, he needed a lot more guidance on the projectile itself. So one of the things I did is I put together, if you guys are watching if you're watching the channel, you'll kind of see like, okay, cool. What I wound up doing, right, is I Franken bashed using just, I've got Midjourney. So in this case, I just made a bunch of Missile sprite sheets, which I think I showed here. Let's see, there we go. So you can kind of see it here, like, and I think that's even up above. Did I do that? Oh, I think it was just there. So yeah, so I did kind of a Franken bash as like, hey, this is just kind of what I'm thinking, right? I passed it over to him. He did and put up a new sprite sheet for testing. And then I take a look at the different sprite sheets, right? It's good to have a history. So yeah, here we go. So you can see like, I was like, oh, let me just get some Missile designs, that I kind of liked. I did, I probably did 30 or 40 explorations with Midjourney in this case. There's so many generative AI things out there now. You throw a stone, but it's generative AI, so it's it's hard to get consistency across a larger spectrum of art. And, and frankly, it also sort of starts to become more generic. So what we do is, while we use generative AI, we definitely, as a basis, that's mostly me using generative AI to faster prototype and find the things that I kind of like, the things that appeal to me, and gives me a chance to noodle on that stuff. And then what happens is I use that as kind of a basis for then sharing with the artists, like kind of what I'm thinking. And then based on their skills, right? Like our lead artist, Dimitri, shout outs to you. Fantastic guy, right? Like we've spent 5 years, almost, maybe more, working together at this point on essentially our world of characters, right? So I won't go too far down the rabbit hole here. But we have all these characters, that we like. For instance, here's Gondis, the main boss character that we first conceptualized and finished in 2019. So long before we were going to be a video game. And so Dimitri and I spent a lot of time, and Zay and a few other folks, really starting to like figure out how and what we really like between us, and how that, and how and kind of the driving results of that. the details, the things that I really like, you know, from a director perspective. And Dimitri has done a fantastic job channeling that, right? So, and to give you an example, that was just the finalized card. Here is, and we have little different projects from like doing our animations and things like that. Is it finalized? This is the environments. Yeah, it's probably Gondis. Gondis Aneda boss. Gondis throne room update. Gondis emotes. Oh yeah, we did the emotes. Those are super fun. Gondis layers for animation. Gondis front pose animation prep. Gondis Angler Brute. Yeah, here it goes. I think this is the final bits. So while we finished in 2019, so just these are always fun to do this, right? So if I scroll, and that's the nice thing about Trello cards, right? Like it gives you a very focused, long form review, right, of what you're working on, because art is iteration. Game development, game design is iteration. It's time, right? And as time changes, you get better at it, but you also want to be able to come back and look at very focused conversations. So, you know, and I've just, this is one of the tools that I found that I used and I really enjoy. So you can see here, I think, yeah. So, and back then when I was doing, we didn't have, there was really a concept of generative AI back when we started these projects. So, so we started in September 6th, 2019. And while we had some other spinoff projects from this, we mostly wrapped up and finished, you know, March 22nd. So, I mean, September, you know, like on average, I think it's about 3 months real time that we spent. So like people often, they see the end result of what you're working on and they just assume like, you know, like your one hit, like your overnight success. And, you know, people don't realize how much time and attention and detail it takes to really, I think, you know, to realize your visions. Now, some people, and this is me because in my particular sense, I am not well-versed. Like I have the imagination that I've loved and stoked my entire life. It's super influenced, right? But I'm not very good at sketching. Like I don't have a lot of skills for that. So one of the things I wound up doing, for instance, right, when I was developing this character, is I was like, ooh, I really like these anglerfish kind of ideas, right? And I like these kind of big chompy mouth things. And so what I did is I basically created like kind of mood boards. I would do Google searches and find things that appealed to me: thick, heavily muscled body, right, oversized hands. And I just use these aspects to like kind of direct, you know, like with Dimitri, like what was in my mind. And then to give to him, and he would sort of synthesize the concepts, bring in his own like, you know, style and take on it. And then, you know, for the most part, like we would go back and forth, and we do that a number of times, right? And our characters, like heroes, enemy bosses in my mind, are two pieces. This is very fighting game-esque, right? Like I'm a huge fan of Soul Calibur, but like it's the character and how they look and how they fight and what their emotion is, like how action oriented it is, but it's also their weapon, right? Like their weapon is a big part of their identifier. And that's a big part of the story and Dr. Boss Key in the universe and things like that. And, you know, and we just, over time, we go through the sketching process, we look at the details, and, you know, like I could spend hours and hours and hours talking about this stuff, but let's get back to it. So anyways, coming back to where we're at with the bullets, right? Same kind of concept, right? So going back and forth, doing the tests. And now let's jump back into because I'm all over the map. Let's jump back into the game. All right, cool. So a couple things that I do in terms of setup is I wanted to have basically a boss character. Most of these patterns are big boss style patterns that I've prototyped. And look, they're just prototypes. Some of them will be used, some will be tweaked, you know, but now I have a basis of lots of different things that I've enjoyed that I'm not super stressed out about whether they're going to be great or not. Like, you know, there's still lots of gameplay to discover, you know, and I want to encourage you as a developer, you know, take your time. Don't be afraid to just experiment. You know, like, you know, as I was a really good, a longtime buddy of mine, who's a VFX artist. He's the lead VFX artist now. And he's been in the game industry about as long as I have, right? Like we worked together way back in the early 2000s. You know, like he was like, oh yeah, a lot of times these days, or for a while, like there's a certain mentality where they just say, if you're trying to learn something new, you're going to fuck around and you're going to figure it out. don't be overstressed about the complexities. One of the nice things about using a tool set like Shmup Creator is that you have the ability to have a lot of the heavy lifting. You don't have to think about how to write code. A little bit of scripting, a little bit of logic, right? So the barrier to entry is much lower. It does mean that you're a bit more standardized, but you don't have to worry about pooling and object instantiation and memory management and input. Like, you can just focus a lot more on your art and expression. Great. It's a great canvas in that respect. So anyways, coming back to it. So what I did is I wound up setting up a boss enemy. I basically gave him kind of just different points for his weapons, right? And then I wanted to have here, I have basically an override, which when this is set, is that right? Let me see here. I think it's down here. All right. Yeah, so I have a trigger down here, which is still within the camera viewpoint. That's just when viewed by camera, I basically set this, I'm setting the weapon set to nothing. So that way, and then I think from there, what do I do? So I set that weapon set to nothing. And then here, is it this? And there was that. Let me take a look here. Is it this? Oh, now, like, I gotta pull it apart and take a quick look. Let's pull this down here, make sure I don't save. All right. Yeah, okay. I think all I wound up doing is, yeah. Okay. So, so it's interesting, like, that doesn't actually show. Is that right? Ah, okay, cool. Yeah, so even though it doesn't highlight when I go into by pressing space in the runtime, basically, it doesn't show that it's being active, but I know it's activating set 5. And so I came back in here and I was like, all right, cool. There are a few things I wanted to prototype with this boss. One is I wanted to have better transitions between weapon sets. And so I set up some logic for that. And I wanted to have the weapon sets kind of graduate. You know, like in this case, we have 5 different weapon sets. And you can see here, right, like that the weapon sets are changing. In this case, they're kind of an evolution. And then I kind of wound up using set 5 is sort of my like, hey, let me try new weapon bits. And a lot of times what I wind up doing is when I want to create a weapon for the first time is I'll come in here and I will find one of the weapons that I like, because now I prototype a bunch, right? Like, and then again, I look at the different enemy ones. So I know if I see all the E's, here are all the different ones, right? And then what I'll do is I will duplicate that weapon. I don't need to do it here in this case. And then now I have a starting point for that weapon, and I kind of figure out like, ooh, what do I like and how do I want to experiment with this, right? And one of the really cool parts about Shmup Creator is that when you come into the weapon tab system, you basically have quite a few different behaviors, right? So you have your AI bits, so you can use a safe zone. So this makes it like sometimes you might want to have a weapon that triggers from off screen, right? Don't recommend it very often, but you could do it for like laser guides or things like that. There are reasons for it, but you should know that you have that option, right? You can have a wait for target. So like it needs to find the player, and once it's targeted the player, it will then shoot. You have random weights for min weight, max weight. You have a warm up time, which is quite useful. You have a loop, like, you know, or a once off. Does it only shoot once? Or does a loop, right? And then over here in your burst tab, this is where you get a lot of flexibility and bang for your buck, right? So, and one of the things I'd highly recommend here is just get comfortable with, I don't know, like making adjustments and just seeing what's what. Now if I just change the burst speed of this is kind of nuts. Like this is anxiety inducing nuts, right? But maybe it works, because in this particular case, I have the astral projection, so I can hold off this crazy like storm of bullets, right? And maybe the gameplay is, holy crap, whoa, look at that. Like maybe the gameplay is that the player sees it and they're like, I gotta shoot. And then, oh, now they have a corral of missiles. This is actually kind of fun. But you have a corral of missiles, right? And you're like, oh, how do I do that? And then now you've created something that, you know, you may not have found just by changing that 1.6 it was 1.6 where I wanted to have these bursts down to, you know, 0.10, right? So, and then in this particular case with the bullets, all I wound up doing is I set the bullets are going to originate from the weapon direction, right? Which is from the hand here. Ignore the fact this is showing vertical. It's just a side effect of how I had to set things up for my player character. And then all I wound up doing here, nothing else to look at. So under bursts, I found number of bullets. I liked 7, and I wanted to mirror the repeating of these bullets to 18, and I set the angle to 180, right? But you can do things like, maybe we'll set it to 1. Oh, what's that look like? Oh, now we got 1 little missile barrage. Okay, but you shouldn't be afraid. Maybe you want to try 18. Like, let's do ultra, holy crap, right? Like, okay, maybe 18's a little too much, right? Maybe we want to go back to, I think it was 7. But so here, again, you're just kind of playing around, and if just a little pro tip for you, if you're making changes in the editor and you go to real time, right? I'm just taking the tab key to go to runtime. If the changes don't seem to be making changes, then just click OK and then go back in. Sometimes things like playing with lasers, that not all the parameters get pushed each time to change the bullets. So it's very rare, but it can happen, right? But the point being here is that, I can get different levels of playability. And one of the things I wanted to focus on is I wanted to have these big sweeping, like, holy moly, here comes these big weapon arcs with the missiles, right? And I wanted to be able to dodge around those, right? Even before I made them things that you could shoot and destroy, right? So my main point here is play around with it, right? So also under number of bullets, you have the bullets interval. So there's usually tool tips if you mouse over these things. So like the time between each bullet shot during one burst, right? Well, what if I change this to 0? What happens here? Oh, now this may not be super great, but then again, look, it actually gives me this unintended consequence I didn't think of, which makes the missiles, because they're right on top of each other, it actually gives them sort of like hit points, right? One of the things that you should be aware of, and that's kind of cool, right? Like, we're just gonna fuck around and figure it out, right? So the other thing that's really important is, in my particular universe of games, and I mentioned this in the other video, I like so we have energy weapons, we have ballistics, kind of, right? But we also have physical weapons, missiles, right? And I really like that missiles can be destroyed. And one of the cool things in Shmup Creator is that you have the ability under the bullet tab. So you come down here, you have all these cool little options. Don't be afraid to mess with these things. And then one of the check marks you have is that you can make them destructible. A destructible bullet can be destroyed by another bullet. That's pretty cool, right? So, and it turned out, if you come back here, like unintended consequences of just playing around, if I have 8 bullets and they're all stacked on top of each other, that actually is sort of like 8 hit points for the bullet, right? Which is kind of cool. And, so like, what could you do with that? Like, what kind of gameplay can you do with that? And in Interstellar Sentinel-1, one of the things that we did is we created the bat bullet. And the bat bullet there's just these swarms of bullets that move towards the player, and that you can shoot them. Yeah, they are enemies. People don't know the difference, right? But in the engine, they're technically bullets because the engine is very efficient at, you guessed it, rendering lots of different bullets. So, and there are limitations with this stuff, but again, like, this is part of the creative process, right? So coming back to the burst side of things, you have all these other things that you can do to play around. One of my favorites is symmetry, right? You turn off symmetry and you're like, okay, cool. So now they don't all completely move the same way, but now look, the behaviors are actually different in the way that they actually swarm around. And it's pretty cool, right? And again, if you turn symmetry back on, and I mean, this is like the heart of game development, in my opinion. This is some of the most fun stuff. You find things you're passionate about and you just fuck around until you figure it out. What if we want to make these, I don't know, 128 bullets? Oh, it's nutty. It's so nutty that we've broken the visuals, right? Okay, so maybe it's a little too nutty. Well, maybe we go back to 32. Look at that. And the engine provides a lot of things. Now, one of the things that's really hard, this is hard in anything that you're going to do in life, right? Which is, you have an idea of what you want a bullet to do, or how you want it to behave, or how you want the boss to behave. And then you're trying so hard to like get the tools to produce this behavior that you want. And the reality is for me at least, some of the hardest things to do is one, gain experience. Hence, that's why fucking around, figuring out, and just experimenting and prototyping and playing around with things, right? Sometimes it's fun to take challenges. It's what I like to say. I mean, I've started doing indie development, like when I was making some prototype maps for Counter-Strike back in like that, the World, was it World Machine? It was in the Hammer editor. I think it's World Machine 2.0 or something like that, right? And I was just, like I never published any maps, but I started to learn through doing those prototypes things about draw distance and optimization and how much geometry you could have on a level, what spawn points look like, right? So a lot of times, don't be so determined to make it happen at all costs that you frustrate yourself, because sometimes what you need to do is take a complex problem and say, cool, like, what do I know about bullets? Before you create a complex enemy boss pattern with how bullets are going to behave, maybe you just need to sit down and play with, like, what does it mean to have a basic bullet, right? And how does it shoot? How fast should bullets move in your world? And as you start to think about these things and you do little prototypes, they will help give you lessons. And then the cool part is as your knowledge grows, then you can take on more and more challenges because you have a bigger knowledge base. So a lot of times people in the community will be like, hey, how do I set up this weird, how could I set up like a finite bomb chain spam? And I was like, well, I don't know if you could actually do that. But then I like to put on my little hat and go, how would I go about doing this? Have I done anything similar? And maybe I don't have all the answers, but sometimes a little prototype will help, right? And prototypes take some of that pressure off of you. And everyone gets frustrated when they're trying to be creative. Creativity is not like a one size fits all. People will tell you this. I've never met a entertainer that doesn't have anxiety before they do a show or before they do a performance or before they work on creating art, right? So, but anyways, my main thing here, right, is play. I don't just play with your parameters. What's this here? Oh, what does that do? Oh, that's weird. That creates like a weird half moon thing, right? Oh, neat. And that was just us changing the spread angle to 60. Maybe we'll do angle 60 and we'll do horizontal spread, I don't know, 90. Let's try that and see what happens. Whoa, what is that? I don't think anyone is gonna. So if I ship something like this, someone would probably punch me in the face, right? But you don't know until you experiment with these things, right? But maybe we try 10. Maybe we have a different horizontal spread. Oh, whoa, that's weird. And then maybe it pops too much, and I'm like, oh, maybe we should just do 1. Oh, interesting. So now we get like the sort of half moon semicircle I never expected. From using the spread angles, right? So maybe change spread to 10. What does that do? And you just sit down and the thing that's going to happen is time is going to rip away. So another interesting pro tip for you, right, is when you find something you like, make a copy of it, put it somewhere, because as I heard this the other day. I was talking with my buddy Dimitri, our lead artist on the project, and basically, whenever you do any art, don't ever delete it. Don't ever throw it away, right? Maybe it doesn't ever really get to see the light of day, but you never know when something that you found kind of exciting or for whatever reason, before you just keep noodling and go away, make a copy of the weapon. Just tuck it away for you. It's very cheap on the engine's side to have different weapons, right? So just food for thought, keep that in mind when you're iterating on stuff, right? Because you never know. And it might, because you never know when you're going to have this oh yeah, remember when I created that really cool Missile fan thing? Where'd that thing go? You can't even find it's because you deleted it. It doesn't exist anymore. Now it's going to be harder for you to go back and find and replicate that happy accident than had you had something you could look for like a little inspiration for you, right? So, all right, let's see here. And what if we, probability, what if we make speed, I don't know, 60? Let's see what happens here. Whoa, missile barrage! Yeah, oh my God, that's actually kind of cool and super scary, right? Like, that is nutty, what if we made it, I don't know, minus 180 on speed, or 99 as fast as it go? Whoa, that's kind of cool. What if we did positive speed instead, 99? Oh, yeah, okay. So, like, you know, sometimes, and that's just probability, something's going to go faster than others. But what if we made it like 10? And, you know, the nice thing about the editor here, too, right, is that you get a sense for how it sort of is changing some of your abilities, you know, when you're actually just kind of iterating, right? So if I change, I don't know, bullet offset spread to -30. Oh, interesting. All right. So it makes a different kind of feeling for the things together. Anyways, so and then probably one of the other things here, right, is under missiles. So we've got our texture that I showed you, right? In this case, we wanted it to be attached to camera. So choose if the fired bullet is world or camera relative. That just means that when the camera is moving, does it stay in the camera or does it move through the world and not stay in the camera? All right. In this case, it's a projectile. We have the animation, right? So in my case, we kind of standardized on a 1.0, but what if I made this 4? And it's got 4 columns and 4 rows. And here you can see now I've made, like, the whole thing is very seizure inducing. It's flickering, right? It's flickering or not. So, and actually maybe I should come back here as we're fucking around and figuring it out. And then let's change this back to, I don't know, it was like 12 or something like that. It's easier to see the bullets. So, and I'm like, oh, like, I don't, you know, like the animation is too fast in that particular case, right? So, you know, a lot of times this is just game development, you know, 101. Let's try 12. Oh my God, seizures. But, and then you're like, okay, maybe that's not the thing. So maybe we try 0.1, you know, 0.1. And now they as very, very slow because it's 4:12. I think it's 4x4. Yeah, so it's 16, I think. 4, 8, 12. Yeah, so it's 16 frames of animation, right? So, and what is happening is with the animation, it's every 0.1 seconds in the engine, it will then switch to the next frame, right? So I'm like, well, that one's maybe a little too slow. And I can already see here, it's still probably too slow, right? So then it's like, okay, well, why don't we try 0.5? Oh, here's a nice other pro tip rule for you, right? So, whenever you're tuning or tweaking something, you know, if you're moving in a bigger number, double it. You know, sometimes quadruple it. If you're moving in a negative number, then half it. So if you're at 1 and you want to see what double, switch it to 2. Or if you're at 4, switch it to 8, right? Because that'll give you a bigger delta. Even if it's wrong, it helps you from getting in a place where you're only changing things in such a small range that you have to iterate a lot more. So I think about it in terms of chunking, right? So just, you know, some food for thought. Some, you know, we're just talking here, right? So like, let me try 0.6. Okay, right? Like 0.6 is there. You know, like I don't see the pulsing, the glow on the missile tip in this area here, but I definitely see it like showing fairly well in the exhaust, right? I'm like, okay, well, those things don't quite work for me, so I'm gonna go back to 1, right? Because I feel like that kind of hits that sweet spot of glowy bits glowing and having enough noise in the tail of the rocket itself. All right, so destructible was the thing, invincible, cancelable. So the other things here that we wound up using to make this particular projectile type, right, is so we went with aim, right? So in this particular case, you have a direction behavior, modify the bullet trajectory during its life. And you have a couple choices. You have none, aim, which means it's aiming at the player. You have gravity, which is kind of cool, left, right, random, and angle, right? This is actually really cool. This gives you a lot of power. So we have set that the strength of the aim lasts for 3.5 seconds. It actually starts at 0.5 seconds. And sorry. Let me back up. That was wrong. So the strength is how strong the projectile will move towards the player. And the start time is when that should start. So when the bullet is, so the moment the bullet is drawn or fired, I guess, then it starts at 0 and at about, so I want it to come out straight and then I want them to home, right? So, and you can see that here. So there is the homing aspect of this, right? So you can notice here, So notice how they come out, and then they, like, as they start to fire forward, then they wind up aiming towards the player, right? And that's because so basically in shmups, anything that aims at the player means the player has to move at some point, right? And it's very cool, but you don't want all your bullets all the time to always aim at the player. So you want to mix it up a little bit, because these types of homing projectiles are much harder to deal with, because the moment the player decides not to interact or they're not looking at the projectile, they're going to take damage, right? So so what we do is we start that, and again, like we could make this, I don't know, let's make this 3 seconds. Oh, interesting. So if it's at 3 seconds, whoa, like it kicks in and then they come back in from off screen. That is an evil pattern, right? Like, holy shit. Now, maybe if I had a warning indicator, like if I had a warning indicator over here that's like danger, 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 right? Like that would be cool to warn the player that they're in danger, like might be super, super cool there. But it's also probably not what I want to have happen. But what if we make, so it would make it 0. Oh, hey, when it's 0, it's now a whole different bullet effect. And this is changing one number, changes an entire different way your projectiles are behaving with the player, right? And this isn't bad. This is like a different kind of thing, but this wasn't quite what we were going for, which is why as I played with this, right, I was like, oh, my sweet spot seems to be here. Because I really want that to have that fan out, right? Now the fan thing I found that was cool, because when the missiles go out and they take up, so when they take up all this area and all this area, it's kind of screen filling, and it's kind of exciting, and it catches your eye, right? It's different than when we had like the previous version. And then they all start to home in on you, and you're like, ooh, like something about that tickles my shmup brain, right? And a big part of, at the end of the day, when you're making a shmup, when you're making a game, you're trying to find the fun and find the things that appeal to you, both gameplay wise, visual wise, right? Emotion wise. And then you're trying to like create an interactive canvas to give players the opportunity to have, or viewers, don't forget, shmups are also about people watching games, right? Games are about other people watching games and people playing games too, right? So finding things that are aesthetically appealing to you, and they create those moments, because at the end of the day, you're trying to pull the Steve Jobs thing, right? You're trying to like surprise them with, you're trying to, you're trying to surprise them with the light, like you're trying to make wonder and delight. You're trying to, to excite the player, right? So, there's more gameplay in that aspect. But anyways, my point being is that, so here with that one particular type here, and these values, so the other one is duration, right? So, I want to only turn on the homing towards the player, because I kind of wanted to have the formation stay a little bit, and then I only want it to have the last for 0.5 seconds. But for instance, I don't know, let's try 3 seconds here. What's this? Oh shit, whoa, that's a whole other thing. Look at that. Now we're doing like more, and then this is way more in my mind, right? This is this is way more anxiety inducing for players. And you could do this. There's no reason why you can't, but the question you have to ask yourself is it fun? But also, right, like what happens, where does the player get trapped? Now, in our particular case, because you can shoot your way out of most of your problems, you're pretty okay there, right? But, if you're trying to like just be efficient with your dodging, how do you escape, right? Is there a place where the player makes the wrong movement and now they're in a place where they can't escape, right? Like here, is that fun? Is that what you want to create? And I personally think that if you set up situations for the player where there's no way for them to achieve the success of winning without taking damage, I think you've failed them, right? I think we all know what it's like to be unfair, right? Like I mean, basically, if I really wanted to, I could do something completely awful and be like, yo, let's make this 12 seconds. Let's come back over here. Let's make the number of bullets 64. Let's make the bits here 18. And it's like, cool. How are we gonna? Oh shit! Right? Like, you can. And it's interesting. Look, this is a really cool, interesting, snaky thing, right? Like, maybe there is actually a way to survive this. This is like advanced bullet leading, right? And we're doing it. Holy shit, right? But I didn't sit down and think about this, but then, I messed that up, right? Like, that was one way. And now the question is for players, how long is it going to take for them to figure out how to basically to play against this particular attack, right? Uh-oh, I got in trouble, right? So, and you know, it's like watching the Super Mario Maker levels that are really hardcore, right? And people really have a good time making absolutely critical time. You have to do the whole sequence perfect, and the moment you fail, then you're gonna die and you have to retry. Like, there's lots of people that love creating that stuff and playing against that stuff. It's super hardcore, but there's a reason why that isn't Nintendo's design for the regular Super Mario games, right? Like, Nintendo wants to create games that are very accessible for a lot of people. That doesn't mean they're not challenging, you know, but they're not so insane that they are like the Super Mario Maker levels. Now the good news is, you know, they got a community that can make that stuff for them. They don't have to make it, and I think there's probably something really cool about seeing that, right? By the way, this is like a cool, like, weird organism. I'm having a lot of fun with this, you know. So just food for thought. All right, I know this was crazy long-winded. You know, I thought I would just sit down and maybe try a little bit different style video. You know, feel free to leave comments down in the description. I'll link back. MK, thank you very much for, you know, for the question. And maybe I'll probably, maybe I'll put a little time code in and I'll give you the TLDR version of this. So 1 second, let me get to this. All right, we're gonna do the TLDR version. All right. Okay, cool. So, oh. And bring this back up here. And we do this. We'll do something like this, maybe. There we go. All right, cool. All right, so here's the TLDR version. If you want to do something like this for... Oh, did I break that? I didn't save that, did I? Uh-oh. That's interesting. Oh, I think I've discovered something. It's not the end of the world. I knew what my parameters were before, but now, I must have, I don't think I saved it. Okay, so one thing to be aware of, right, is is that maybe, let's take a look at this. So we'll go back into the weapon. We'll go into the triangle. We'll go down to 5. Come back over here. Let's change this to 0.5, which it was again. Okay, so. Oh, yeah, and that wasn't just that. It was. I think it was 18. Might have been 16. Might have been 12. I'm not gonna take a look at this. Repeater. I think it was like 12. Okay, not quite what we had. I have to go back and look at my numbers again for that. But now we're gonna run a test. Okay, so we've adjusted that. Let's go here. Let's reload this. I'm not saving it. And you know, sometimes, you know, this is how you learn, right? You know, like, it's always good to be aware of these types of things. All right. Okay. So, something to know, that even if you don't save your scene, apparently, and I didn't actually know this. So when you make adjustments to your weapons, those apparently are getting saved, even if you're not saving your scene. So, you know, like, all the more reason to make copies of things. Like, if I wanted to do this because I had a prototype weapon that I was dealing with, right? That I should have made a copy of it, shared it with, and then started noodling on that. So, but anyways, not the end of the world. All right, cool. So then the TLDR version of this is, so we had weapon flare, weapon bullets, bullet interval there. And then on the bullet, we had aim. It was 350 when it changed there. That was 2. That was there. That. And then now, let's see, time between bursts is the same. Loop is good. All right. I feel like I did something else with start position. Okay. Well, anyways, but this is pretty close. So the TLDR version, right? So what you want to do is create your missile with your texture, which we talked about. I have some other videos that already kind of cover this a little bit. And here, what I wound up using for this particular projectile set, all right, so you can see it again here, is we set directions, weapon direction. We didn't have to do anything with the locator because we're not using the locator animation. Burst we set to something like 12. Bullet intervals were 0.12. And then we used repeater, 180-degree angle. We set the repeater to like 12. Might have been 18. It's probably a little too much. I think it was. But anyways, I'll find it again. Doesn't matter. It's all prototype. So there, and then on the bullet itself. So in this case, we attach it to camera. It's a projectile. The skin we talked about. It's animated in the bullet itself, which I showed you guys. And that's what's set here. The bullet size we set in our case to 1.2, but this is also based on the size of your own texture. Make sure you adjust the collision for your bullet, right? You don't want to have a bunch of collision that is bigger. So like anytime the player gets hit by something that they can't actually physically see, that's pretty cheap. It's just bad game design. In our case, we set the damage for the bullet to 1. We set them to be destructible. They're also cancelable, so which basically just means when you use a super or a bomb, for instance, or you kill the boss, that the bullets themselves can be canceled. The direction behavior type is aim. Strength is 3.5. Start time is 0.5. Duration is 0.5. And then in our case, we changed life duration to like 10 seconds, so they don't just live for a long time off a screen. There's some other timeout stuff for that. Okay, that is the TLDR version. If you enjoyed this video, if you made it this far, thank you so much. I think I'll just put this in the tips and tricks section. It's a bit more of a ramble, but like there might be some value in this. So thanks for hanging out. Thanks for being part of this. Thanks for dealing with my own musings of kind of how I go through my process. I hope it was helpful. MK Studio, I'll link you this section so you can see it, the video as well. And to everyone else, we'll see you next time.